Hi, I'm Jenna and I'm going to go ahead and make homemade pumpkin cake for my recipe. So first off, I want to show that I do have a functional kitchen. Over here we have knives. Over here we have cutting boards. We have 3 different ones. 2 of them are in use right now from other roommates, but we normally keep them in the cabinets down here. Then beyond that, it's clean first off. And then we have a stove, which you notice is preheating at 350 degrees for my cake. We have a functional refrigerator, and then a functional sink. So there's that. I like to think that it's a nice kitchen even though it's small. So I'm going to go ahead and make pumpkin cake. I need to get rid of all these windows. Okay, so here I have my recipe for pumpkin cake. And you can see that it's 3.5 cups of flour. It has sugar, pumpkin pie spice, salt, baking powder, baking soda, pumpkin, eggs, orange juice, oil, and then I combine them all in different fashions. Now, due to my lack of more than 2 cups and everything like that, I already started some combinations. I have some flour, some salt, some pumpkin pie spice, some baking soda in here, and then the last cups and teaspoons, etc., I'll pour in as I go. So I have all my ingredients ready, and I can go ahead and start explaining. Okay, so first off, I'm going to talk about the baking powder. So baking powder, it is a leavening agent, and it consists of baking soda, cream of tartar, and a moisture absorber such as cornstarch, and it acts as yeast, but faster. It is used when there's no acid present, which I'll get to in a second because I know you saw orange juice in this. It's usually used for cookies, cakes, pastries, pies, quick bread. It's used in a lot of different things, and it allows gas formation when the acid comes in contact with it and or when it's heated. So it's pretty cool. Another really cool thing is whenever you use it, it is 1 to 1/4 teaspoon per 1 cup of flour, which I do have flour. So, and if you do use too much, you get big bubbles, and then they come up to the top and pop, and then your cake is dense and flat. It's really sad. We don't want that. So that is the baking soda, and I'm going to head and use 2 teaspoons. So I already have 1 teaspoon in there. I'll go ahead and put my other teaspoon in. Okay, next I'm going to talk about the baking soda that I have. Baking soda is pure bicarbonate, and it needs acid and moisture to make carbon dioxide, and then it expands in high temperatures and makes it rise. In my recipe, the acid that we're using is orange juice. The orange juice has a pH of 3.5, so it's rather acidic, and it works. So the baking soda, it'll start immediately once the orange juice is poured in it. That's why we're doing all the dry ingredients first, so that it won't completely expand and start making all these bonds without being ready to put in the oven. So next, I'm actually gonna go ahead and put the rest of my baking soda in because, baking soda, and this is the 2 teaspoons. The baking powder was 1/2 teaspoon, sorry. I swear I actually did put the right amount in. If you notice, I have both baking powder and baking soda, which might be confusing to some people. It kind of depends on the rest of the ingredients. Now, I do have an acid, but the combination of them makes it kind of tangier and browned, and actually is a better texture, looks better, everything like that. Also, if you just use baking soda, then it may taste kind of bitter, and so this is kind of counteracting. So it's a good thing. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about the eggs, which we're not putting in yet because that's part of the not a dry ingredient. Otherwise, it'll get moisture added, and then the baking soda might enact, and we don't want that yet. So mine is 4 eggs. Now, the really cool thing about eggs is that it gives the cake a nice color, it coagulates everything, it emulsifies, and it adds texture. So eggs are very important to these. The egg yolks, it has a nice fatty content, so it'll make the ingredients kind of moist and give it a good texture and creamy. So that's really nice. And the egg yolks also have something called lecithin, I believe it is. I can never pronounce things. It's a type of phospholipid. So it has an emulsifying power to be a lecithin that gives like water and oil, which don't normally mix. When water and oil have eggs combined, then it will go ahead and make them bond and actually stay instead of just separating again. So that's the really cool thing. And so eggs, they have this cool power of proteins and the phospholipids that just kind of give a good bond. The egg whites, they are usually used, specifically just the egg whites, they're used in like frostings and that kind of thing because it gives it a more frothy texture. So we like to use an entire egg opposed to just the egg whites. Yeah, and so it also helps it to coagulate, so it gives it good bonds, it goes ahead and gets everything together, and it helps the flour out, which I'll get to in a second. So it'll give a good bond and good texture and help coagulate and emulsify and everything like that. So those are the eggs, which I'll get to in a second when I'm pouring it in. Next, I believe I have the flour. So I'm using enriched flour. It's all-purpose. And it's bleached, which the bleach doesn't really matter. It doesn't change anything. It's just more processed, pretty much. So it has 3.5 cups of flour, I believe. Yep. So 3.5 cups of flour, and there's actually 4 different types of flours. There's the all-purpose flour, which I'm using. And the all-purpose flour, it can be used in cakes, quick breads, biscuits, everything pretty much. It's all-purpose. So it has a combination of a high gluten and a soft gluten, or a hard gluten and a soft gluten, and it's also bleached or unbleached. So it can be used for most things, and it's easier than buying just cake flour and only using it for cakes, and then it getting bugs in it and being no use. So I went ahead and bought the all-purpose enriched flour. Then there's also a bread flour, which is unbleached and it's high gluten. So it goes ahead and it's made of hard wheat, it's for yeast breads, it's mainly used for bread. Makes sense. Then there's cake flour, which is mostly soft wheat. It has a fine texture, it's mainly for cakes, and it has moist texture, it'll give it a good balance opposed to bread flour that'll have the extra bonds and that kind of thing. Then there's pastry flour, that it will give it more flaky texture and kind of buttery little layers, and it's nice. Pastry flour, it's similar to cake flour, but it's slightly higher of a gluten content. And then there's self-rising flour, which is all-purpose flour, but it has the salt already added. So if you're going to go ahead and use it in bread recipes, just don't use the salt. If you're going to use it in quick bread, then omit the salt and the baking powder. Otherwise, it'll be a mixture of rising and falling and just bad. So flour, it's very important in baking because when mixed with moisture, gluten is formed. And gluten kind of holds everything together. It gives you these little pockets of air that it'll make it rise and it'll keep it bonded, and it's very helpful. If you don't have gluten, then it's bad, pretty much. Gluten is determined by the mixing time and the presence of it, of the shortening of the dough. The longer the mixed before baking, then the gluten bonds will be tighter and more formed. For strengthening the gluten, fat strengthens the gluten, rather, sorry. Fat strengthens gluten because it coats proteins and weakens the bonds it forms with the baking goods. So that's pretty cool. All-purpose flour, which I'm using, has medium gluten content, so it'll go ahead, and it also has about 12% gluten, I believe it is. When gluten is stretched in the kneading or the mixing process, which I'll be mixing today opposed to kneading, then it will go ahead and make the bonds and help it inflate, and the dough will rise. So the hardening of the gluten molecules is what allows the bread to hold and give it the correct texture. Now, there's not much fat in the cakes, which, like cookies, on the other hand, do. So the cookies have more fat, which makes it kind of crumblier, and that way the cake isn't the same exact texture. That's how, like the fat, also called shortening, which we learned already that shortening is oil opposed to fat necessarily, like Crisco. But it like the more fat it is, it kind of makes it crumblier, and cookies have more fat. That's pretty much that. Okay, so in conclusion, why I'm using these products. Okay, so both the baking soda and baking powder, it'll help it. Oh, my screen went off. It'll make it well lifted, tangy, and brown color because it's the combination. It's the leavening agent that'll make it rise also, and the orange juice will help it out so that the baking soda will have a nice acid to react with. pH 3.5, very acidic, very helpful. So the eggs, they help to emulsify, to coagulate. It gives it the protein that helps everything, so that's nice. The flour, it has the gluten that'll help it form, keep it bonded all together. The sugar, it'll give it a nice sweet texture, or sweet taste rather, and it also gives it a fluffy texture and actually helps it to last longer. And then the spices, which I didn't put in yet, I have 2 tablespoons of pumpkin pie spice, and then I already put the salt in because I ran out of teaspoons. So I also used a teaspoon of salt, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and put my last cup of flour in. I already have 2.5 cups of flour in there. And I already had 2 cups of sugar, so here's my last cup of sugar. And it wants me to go ahead and mix everything. Now, because these are all dry ingredients, nothing is actually happening scientifically quite yet. The baking powder or baking soda, they're still just kind of chilling there, more or less. Okay. So get it nice and mixed so that it will all rise together. Now, it did not say beat or anything, so I thankfully don't have a beater here. My friend is borrowing it. That was kind of not convenient. So I'm going to go ahead and just mix it with a spoon. It's all the dry ingredients, as I already said. Okay, so next it says combine dry and then add oil, pumpkin, eggs, and orange juice. So, yeah, they're both 1 cups. Wanted to make sure. Okay. One cup of orange juice ready. I don't necessarily want to put anything in quite yet, just because it'll go ahead and make the baking soda and baking powder react already. So, don't want that quite yet. 1 cup of oil. Bear with me. And then 4 eggs and pumpkin. Okay, so I'll go ahead and add my 15 ounces of pumpkin, Kroger brand. In this recipe, it can make, I'm using a 9x13 pan, so it stretches as far as it can, but it also can make loaves. It can be in like an actual cake pan. It can be pretty much any way you want to make it. It gave specific heating instructions for the 9x13 pan. It'll be 350 degrees for 45 to 60 minutes. So that's not too bad. Okay, that's the pumpkin. I always like to get as much out as possible, especially since it's pumpkin. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and add my 1 cup of oil. Alright. There's nothing worse than adding something and then realizing it was wrong. So I always like to double check. Pumpkin, oil, eggs, and OJ. I'm going to go ahead and add the 4 eggs now. Try not to get any shell in. It's usually a pretty good idea. Trash is over there. Plastic bowls, not very great for cracking eggs, as I'm learning. That's what my roommate brought. So, making do. 2, 3. And, ooh, 4. No shell though, that's good. Okay, 4 eggs, and last but not least, I'll go ahead and use this rag. Don't want eggs on everything. Last but not least, the acid. 1 cup of orange juice. Then I'll go ahead and mix all of this. And then I'll go ahead and pour it in the pan and put it in my preheated oven. And it should be good. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. And I hope I got a good grade. Okay, bye.